I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we go behind the headlines to cover reporting that the mainstream media would rather you not know about, where we try to recover some lost history, and we try to explain the inexplicable. Today, I'm really pleased to have joining us Bill Gertz, the national security correspondent for the Washington Times. He's done great reporting for the Washington Times for literally decades, as long as I've been around Washington, which is a good long time. Bill's been over at the Times, really churning out stories nobody else covers. Welcome to On Watch, Bill.
Thanks for having me. Great to be on the program. And I'm always amazed at the things that Judicial Watch produces. And I watch what you guys do very closely.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. Besides being the national security correspondent, we'll talk about some of your recent reporting. You've also put out your latest book called Deceiving the Sky, which is really about China's drive for military supremacy. And of course, you regularly host your own podcast called Victory Over Communism. So I guess we're going to take those in order. Let me start off with some of your recent reporting. You focus obviously on our greatest national security threat, which is China. Two stories come to mind. You've done one on Taiwan and the fact that the threat to that island nation may be accelerating or may be more urgent than we originally realized. And then the second article really has to do with China's infiltration, economic infiltration. It's the agents of influence and finance in the United States. I'll let you take them in any order that you want, but those two stories I think are very important to cover.
Sure. First, a little bit about myself. I cover national security affairs with a heavy emphasis on China affairs. As you mentioned earlier before, I'm an old Cold Warrior. I covered the Soviet Union extensively and really turned my focus on China in around 2000, late 90s, 2000. And I remember going to the Pentagon. I was doing a story on the PLA, and I got a briefing at the Defense Intelligence Agency. And in the middle of the briefing, or at the end of the briefing, a colonel came in and said, "The general would like to see you." And the general turned out to be the director of the DIA. And we sat in a windowless conference room in the Pentagon, and he proceeded to tell me that China was not a threat. And I was shocked because I could understand, the political policy for 40 years has been, let's trade with China, let's ignore its behavior, and then hopefully it will moderate its behavior and become a non-threatening power. And it's been an utter disaster. In any case, anyway, so I asked the DIA director, I said, well, why do you think that it's not a threat? And he basically said, because of their statements. And so I could see that there was really a problem, not just within the political and academic community, but within the intelligence community itself.
Right.
Fast forward a few years, and a Chinese spy was discovered inside the DIA, which I feel was the reason that the director gave me that completely bogus answer.
Well, even today, there's people that are trying to say, well, it's not really a threat and it's not really communist. They want to try to massage it, right? They want to try to come up with language and descriptions that it's a hybrid economy, it's a hybrid political system. They're not really militarily aggressors. There's always an excuse. There seems to be a certain chorus coming out of the national security world that's always ready to apologize for China.
Yeah, on Taiwan, that is the hottest flashpoint, and it's been the hottest flashpoint going back for the last 20 years because it's gained momentum in recent years under the leadership in China of Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping, who has ordered the Chinese military to be ready to use force against Taiwan in the coming years.
Right.
And military commanders have testified to Congress that this action could take place as soon as 2027 or even earlier. In fact, the new commander, slated to be commander for the Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Paparo, just testified recently for his confirmation hearing that the timeline is not certain, but that the U.S. is ready for anything that could happen. And again, with wars breaking out in Ukraine and the Middle East, the Chinese are opportunistic enough that they could try a move on Taiwan in the coming years.
I don't know that assurance from the good admiral is true, that we're ready for anything. I don't buy it, frankly. I think that we're probably incredibly vulnerable across the Pacific. Fighting a war in the Pacific is unlike anything we've done in the last, 70 years, really. But the problems with logistics and distances, amphibious operations, the ability to sustain forces at great distances, it's a very different animal. And I don't see that we've committed all the resources necessary to do it.
We haven't. And there's divisions within the current administration and even the military. And I think this was really made clear by former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley. And he carried out what some China hands are calling threat deflation. In other words, playing down the threat from China. And Milley said that, China really doesn't have the capacity to make an amphibious assault across the 100-mile wide Taiwan Strait. And in my reporting, I've pointed out that, China is facing some serious economic problems right now, but not in their military. In the last 4 years, the Chinese have cranked out 3 large deck amphibious helicopter assault ships. So
right.
That's just one indication. And again, they're cranking out submarines like sausages as well. They can do it. There's questions about what the use of their civilian merchant fleet, which they've practiced doing. So things are pretty hot on the Taiwan Strait, and the U.S. is trying to figure out how to deter them. The Biden administration failed to deter Russia, even though the U.S. intelligence community was inside the command and control system of the Russian military. They knew an invasion was coming and were unable to stop it.
Right.
We're facing a kind of similar situation on the Taiwan Strait. We know they've announced they want to be ready to go in a few years, and they're really not doing enough to deter them.
Well, there's a lot of folks that look at the situation with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and say that essentially the position, the analysis, the publicly disclosed, publicly discussed analysis from the United States looking at Russia is that we de facto green-lighted Putin. All the things we said, all the things we did, all the things we acknowledged about his buildup, we basically telegraphed him, okay, go ahead. As long as you make it quick. If you're in Kiev within 48 hours, then good luck. And that Putin read that and said, okay, I got a green light, I can take it.
Yeah, it really was a major failure. Now, here's an interesting point, and I've reported on this, and this is accurate, that in order to dissuade Moscow from invading Ukraine, the Biden administration shared intelligence with China,
right,
thinking that Beijing would
right.
help to, again, dissuade Putin from going in.
I remember
and guess
that.
what the Chinese did? They shared the intelligence with the Russians.
Right.
This is the kind of new axis of evil that's emerging with China leading Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
Exactly. Yeah, I can remember that. And, I have very bad feelings about the level and quality of the intelligence that was shared as we try to impress them about what we can see and what we can hear and what we can measure. And, I have a feeling that was another grave error on the part of the Biden administration. When I compare, I always do this thought experiment, and I say, okay, from the world of the national security chiefs, look at Jake Sullivan and look at his resume, and line that up against somebody like Mike Flynn, right? Who is more qualified or less qualified to be providing national security advice to a president. And the scenario you just described, with us going over to the Chinese and whispering them, "Oh, go tell the Russians we know what they're doing and tell them to knock it off." Talk about, childish. What a remarkably unsophisticated way to convey a message.
Well, I think it reflects, again, this goes to the ideology that people do not understand what is happening in China today is the reanimation or revitalization of Marxism-Leninism. They call it Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics.
Right.
And it is, and I can remember debating the China threat years ago, and a businessman said, "I've been doing business in China for 20 years. I've never met a communist." So I told him to go to the PLA Museum in Beijing, which I visited in the late 90s when I covered a Secretary of Defense visit there. And all the statues of the communist leaders are there. Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. And so, yeah, it's a real failure to understand what's motivating the Chinese. And it's kind of what I call anti-communism, that people are so opposed to anti-communism for whatever reasons, maybe baggage from the 50s or others, but they won't clearly look at what's motivating the Chinese today.
So when it comes to Chinese activities in the United States, you've done some great reporting on various Chinese investment and technology firms. They're the smiley face of the communist Chinese in the United States. They're stealing everything they can get their hands on. They're trying to influence, but via economic warfare, the relationship between China and the United States. Talk about some of your reporting, some of these organizations, and how the Biden administration is engaging or dealing with them.
Yeah, we're at a stage now. Again, excuse me. During the Trump administration, a major shift in U.S. policy towards China was undertaken. It was a halfway measure. It was basically identifying Beijing as a strategic competitor. It should have been clearly stated as this is an adversary or enemy, which
right.
it really is. It's
right.
been engaged in low-level gray zone warfare against us now for going on 2 or 3 decades. The Biden administration came in and adopted many of the policies, some of them good. I'll give them credit on Taiwan. The president stated clearly that the U.S. military would intervene if China uses force against Taiwan.
Right.
But other things changed beginning in very early in the administration, when the Deputy Secretary of State went to China and was given a long list of Chinese demands. And this was Wendy Sherman, and she went there to try and re-engage China, to renew the engagement policy. And the Chinese said, you have to stop persecuting our companies, stop sanctioning our companies, and releasing Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive who was being prosecuted for illicit trade with Iran.
Right.
And so that began a kind of re-engagement policy, which we're now seeing now. And it's letting up and allowing the Chinese to do more business in the United States. TikTok is the biggest example. TikTok is a Chinese owned by a Chinese company, BitDance, which can really use influence, and especially on our young people. Several nations, India among others, have banned TikTok, and yet we're still in the midst of having a debate over whether it should be banned, whether China should be allowed to steal data and influence our population.
I had an interview a few weeks back, when we talked about the ways that China really in an insidious manner infiltrates so many aspects of our economy. And it's obviously all the sort of science, technology stuff you might imagine. But social media is a great example with TikTok. Even genetics, genomic data. They're attempting to gather up or vacuum up all the genetic data they can get in the United States. There's a bill, I guess, underway, or an effort to try to stop them or block them from. What they do is they don't necessarily come straight at us. They subcontract or subcontract on various DOD and other government contracts. And it's their equipment that's doing all the processing. And what you don't realize is there's a back door to the equipment. They can download everything under the sun, kind of like the crazy balloon situation, where they said, oh, the balloon's not a threat. It's flying over all of our bases and doing data dumps back to China, but it's not a threat. I mean, I'm not sure if it's, there's this question as to whether you're either complicit or you're negligent. Which one is it? You know what I mean? It's a horrible situation that our government is actively betraying the public and then lying about it.
It's a combination of both. Again, there's divisions over how to deal with China. On the hard left, which is infiltrated into the Biden administration, you have Marxists or neo-Marxists who actually look at China as the future.
Right.
They see it as a anti-capitalist system that's been able to produce somewhat of a good economy, albeit a technologically totalitarian and politically and engaging in genocide and human rights abuses. But so there is sympathy for its system as well. And again, we're seeing that emerge in the Democratic Party, which is shifting way to the way left. Now, there's still a non-Marxist left within the Democratic Party, but they're being eclipsed by many of the Marxists. So it's a huge problem there.
They certainly are being eclipsed. And increasingly, we see folks that are, they're cheerleading for China. You know what I mean? They are enamored of the system that they developed there. You've written a book, you have several books, but the most recent one, Deceiving the Sky. That's a great title. It kind of points to a few things. I'm just going to let you give our viewers and our listeners a hint as to what you're doing.
Deceiving the Sky comes from an ancient Chinese strategy which went deceive the sky to cross the ocean. And it's based on a story that the Chinese emperor was reluctant to go to war with a neighboring province. And one of the emperor's generals deceived him into going to dinner at the home of a wealthy peasant. And when the emperor stepped into the house, he realized he was on a boat traveling to the front where the general wanted to go. And the general had to decide, do I go to war or do I go back? And the point being is that they say deceive the sky. It really means you have to deceive the emperor or even deceive God in order to achieve your objectives. And this is one of the key features of the Chinese Communist Party, is that they are determined to take over the world. They believe that it's part of their historical mandate. And the main obstacle to that is the free world led by the United States. So China is engaged in a massive effort to undermine and ultimately destroy the United States. And my book covers all different aspects of that threat, from political to financial warfare to the intelligence threat, and obviously the biggest one is the military threat.
That's tremendous. Lastly, I wanted to go over and talk a little bit about your podcast, which is called Victory Over Communism. We're supposed to believe that the Comintern folded up in 1935, and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and communism, something from the history books. What are you talking about? What communism? Where is it? And I argue, as you do, it's never been any more present. But talk to us about Victory Over Communism. What are you trying to accomplish through this podcast?
Sure. I've been doing the podcast for about 2 years. It's an educational effort. It's separate from the Washington Times, although you can find the link to it on the Washington Times. It's a freelance project, and it's an hour-long podcast, and it focuses on 2 alternating topics. The first topic is Chinese communism. And again, my view is that this is the existential threat to the United States, is communist China, and people just don't understand that. So my job is to educate the American people and publics around the world to this threat. So the second topic I do is what I call what I call American Marxism. Or neo-Marxism. Right. And again, this is the basis for the woke ideology that we're seeing infiltrated everywhere from the military to our entire social, political, economic, and business system. And this is, again, it's based on critical theory, which is Again, it's a neo-Marxist ideology, which is based on Marxism. And instead of the workers leading the revolution over the capitalists, it has oppressed groups. It changes the working class. The vaunted group is the oppressed class. So anybody who's an oppressed class is now working to overthrow the capitalist system. And again, we're seeing this. I feel this is also a pretty serious threat ideologically. And again, I don't really go after people per se, but I go after the ideologies, and I try to educate people. So it's 4 parts. The first part is a critique of either Chinese communism or American Marxism. The second part is a counterproposal, which I call a spiritual counterproposal, which is looking at one of the key reasons that communism and Marxism are wrong is that it's atheistic. And having a clear understanding of the nature of God and God's role in history, this is, I feel, really the solution to, and when you put that against the false ideologies of communism and Marxism, it really stands out.
Amen.
I then do a news section, which is often based on my reporting, again, a lot on China. And then I do an interview, and I've done interviews with former State Department officials and other experts, people like from the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and people like Mike Gonzalez at Heritage, who has done tremendous work on American Marxism. So that's basically the podcast. It's a kind of work in progress. It's a bit dry. It's for people that really want to understand the ideology. And again, they're not teaching that in our schools. So I feel like I'm making an important contribution to educating the public on this.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I've watched some episodes, and when I've gone to the link and listened to the first couple episodes, and I was kind of seeing who your guest list was, and I was very impressed with the lineup. It's a great podcast, and our viewers and listeners should definitely hop over there and listen to Bill's excellent work on Victory Over Communism. Bill, as folks want to follow your work, whether it's at your national security correspondent work at the Washington Times, or whether they want to get your book, Deceiving the Sky, or tune in to Victory Over Communism, how can folks follow you? What are the best ways to find?
I'm at the Washington Times. Just go there and search for Bill Gertz. I also have a website. It's called The Gertz File at gertzfile.com, where I list all of my stories, my columns, and all of my books, as well as the Victory Over Communism podcast. Podcast has its own site, which is victoryovercommunism.net. And on social media, all the platforms, I'm at Bill Gertz.
That's great. Bill Gertz, thank you so much for your time. Some tremendous work you're doing. I don't know anybody else who doggedly pursues the communist Chinese threat as you do. So we greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chris.
I'm Chris Farrell, on Watch.